is my honor to introduce today's keynote, Dr. Robert Talbert from Grand Valley State University. He's going to share with us 3 grand challenges for STEM education. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. Let's give him a round of applause and to look forward to today's session. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. And you might want to save your applause until after the talk is over with to see, tell me if it was worth it all or not. Thank you again, Megan, and all your team for inviting me to come back again here to address the Teaching Experiment Academy. I had the pleasure last year of working with this group on a mini seminar on specifications grading. And as the group was getting started, it was a year ago, believe it or not. And I said that this Teaching Experiment Academy is more than just an academy. It's really like a small army of people who are all passionate about teaching and enacting some systemic change in higher ed that's really, really badly needed still today, maybe more than ever. So 1 year later, I'm really grateful to be back with you again to talk with you about some places where I think we can all go from here in terms of 3 grand challenges for STEM higher ed education. And I'm going to give you my screen right now. There we go. So again, thank you for being here. I know everyone's super busy and you have a lot of things to do. So I really appreciate and I'm grateful for taking a slice out of your day to be here with me and to do the work that you're doing. So again, my name's Robert and I'm a professor in the mathematics department at Grand Valley State University here in sunny but still kind of cold Allendale, Michigan. We're up halfway between Grand Rapids and the shore of Lake Michigan. And we're currently in what we call third winter, which means that we might not get any snow for the rest of the year. We've already had our 100 inches a year that we normally have, and thankfully we're moving on. In addition to being in the math department, I also have a sort of newish role in our president's office as what's called a presidential fellow for the advancement of learning. And in that role, I coordinate large-scale initiatives to improve teaching and learning, both at our institution and across our partner institutions in Michigan and beyond. Back in 2017, I wrote a book on flipped learning, and I have another book coming up next year. The manuscript is due in August, so I have my summer mapped out for me. Co-authored with my GVSU colleague, David Clark, on alternative grading systems. The title of the book and the name of our co-authored blog on this subject is Grading for Growth. And while I'm at it, I want to just before we get too far into the talk today, I do want to say that in the chat, I'm just about to drop some info for you. Here's a couple of links. The first one is to a resource page where I have collected all links to all the stuff that you're going to see today. All the research articles, all the magazine articles, all the websites, the books, the blogs, all that stuff. You can just go to the resource page and share that page if you want to, and it's all there for you. Links to the slides also are in that resource page. And also looking at you right there on in the chat. So it's all there, no need to write stuff down. I do also want to mention I'm using a tool today called Mentimeter that allows you not only to view the slides on your screen here in Zoom, but you can also interact with them as we go. And we'll be taking some time during my talk to have me stop talking and hear from you. We'll do that in just a second. The way to do this, I'm going to be keeping the slides up here in your Zoom screen, so you can just watch the screen and follow along. But what I suggest is that you take the screen share out of full screen mode, so that way you'll have a little window with the slides in it, but we'll also be able to see each other's faces, which I think is really important. And then in a separate browser tab or window, or on a separate device like a phone or a tablet, I would like for you to go to, on that separate device or in a separate browser tab, go to this website, www.menti.com, and enter in that code you see when you get there, or you can just scan the QR code. And then in that separate tab or window or on that separate device, you'll also see the slides, but you'll also get the chance to interact with some of the polls that I've embedded. You can't do that on Zoom because that's just a one-way transmission, but you can do it if you open up the menti.com screen on a separate tab or device. And the website and the code will stay pinned to the top of every screen or every slide in the talk, just in case you need to come back to it. So just to make sure that the menti.com stuff works, I would, again, like you to take a separate browser tab or a separate window or a device sitting around. put in that code and just tell me how you're doing today on 3 different metrics. How are you doing today in terms of physical energy, your emotional wellness, and how ready are you for summer? You should see a page when you pull this up that gives you 3 sliders. And so just put the sliders where you think they belong. And then at the bottom of that page, there's a button that says submit, and just click that when you're ready. On my devices, I had to scroll down or swipe down to see that submit button. So you might just have to move the screen a little bit. As we get into the talk, also, if you're looking at the menti.com screen, you might also have to swipe up and down or scroll up and down to see some of the content. And so I see we have 20 people so far. You can see in the lower left corner, 24. A lot of people coming in. Looks like seems to be working, and you're telling me how things are going here. These are updating live. You can see a little probability distribution. See, readiness for the summer is out in the lead. Yeah, I'm feeling it right there with you. We wrapped up this week, but I've got 1 week, and then I've got to turn back around and teach a summer class. So that's fantastic. Looks like the machinery is working here, and looks like we're doing probably about as well in the end of April as you can possibly expect to be doing after a long semester and a long year. So again, if you're having, again, one other thing also I wanted to mention is if you look at the slide that's presented on Zoom in the lower right, there's a couple of icons. I'll kind of wave at them here. There's this one that tells me how many people have responded to the poll, and then there's another one over here to the just to the left of that, where on your Zoom on your menti.com screen, you can click a button that's down below at the bottom of each slide that says "Ask a question" or something of that nature, and you can ask a question about anything at any time using that button. And if somebody asks a question, it'll give me a little badge here that says, "Oh, look, somebody asked you a question." So I'll be aggregating those questions here in Mentimeter as we go, just to kind of keep my brain in one place. I'm probably not going to be looking much at the chat. The chat is for you all, not so much for me. So if you're having a question like Irene is seeing only open Q&A, I will just let you all take full ownership of the chat, and then we will come back to the questions and answers as we have time, and definitely at the end, we'll just have one big page at the end with all your questions aggregated there. Okay, so we got all the boring stuff out of the way. Let's get into talking about challenges, right? Like, who needs more challenges in their lives? Raise your hand. Well, and none of us probably need more challenges in our lives, right? I mean, college teaching is a massive challenge. It's never not challenging to be doing what we do for a living, right? And in the last 2 years, certainly it has not been made any easier by everything that's happened. But without discounting the challenges that we've had to face, I personally am also a firm believer that sometimes we can overcome one kind of challenge by facing other kinds of challenges, to fight fire with fire in some ways. And so I believe that higher education can face up to the challenges we see so often on, for example, social media. Okay, when you go on Twitter, what do you see from academics? Primarily burnout, demoralization, lack of purpose, and everything else, it seems like. I feel like the best way to attack those challenges, first of all, is to attack them and not let them roll over us. And don't tweet about it, but to take on something bigger, something big, something difficult, some kind of moonshot that can galvanize us and get us all working in the same direction on something that really matters. I feel like this sort of dissipation of our energy, we seem to be pulling all in different directions. And that's a large part of what is making the present day so difficult for us. So I'm calling those grand challenges. And what makes a grand challenge? I teach at Grand Valley State University next to the Grand River. It's like part of my vocabulary. But what makes a grand challenge truly grand is, first of all, it's a challenge. It's a real problem, and there's no obvious, simple solution. And second of all, it's grand, right? It's a moonshot. It's something that we do on purpose because it's hard, and because that it matters, and because it has broad applications. And even partial wins on a challenge like this can spark solutions to other problems that are also important. And the point of tackling a grand challenge in general is to create a lot of focused energy on a positive solution to something that really matters. And in this day and age, I feel like we definitely need more solutions and more positive energy for everything that ails us in higher ed. So these grand challenges come out every so often in different areas and different disciplines. Here's a list, for example, from engineering. Oops, I clicked the wrong button there. Apologize. Let me get to it. Sorry. There we go. Some grand challenges in engineering, for example, and you can read that list there. And these are all like very big challenges. Okay, they're not simple. They don't have easy answers to them. But when tackled, they can actually produce more energy than they consume somehow. And I feel like that's the kind of thing that all of us, I feel like that's what you're doing in the Teaching Experiment Academy, is you're taking on a massive challenge about grading systems, for example. And that's a huge problem. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And you've been talking about it all year. And working on that problem unlocks solutions to a lot of other things. So those are the kind of challenges I'd like to discuss with you today. And before I do, I want to just present to you a framework that I'm using to think about them. So any significant problem has to be broken into manageable pieces that a normal person can actually tackle, right? And you have to have some way of measuring your progress along an axis to how close are you to solving this problem. So each of these grand challenges today, I'm going to be phrasing as an objective, okay, some aspirational general thing that needs to be done that hopefully energizes you just thinking about it, okay? It won't look practical, but that's where the next part comes in. For each of these objectives, I'm going to be giving 3 key results, which are more fine-grained quantitative measures for moving toward a solution. Now, these are tasks with metrics attached to them, and it's very important that we focus on the metrics. The metrics are not everything, but they are how we know whether or not we're really making progress on a big problem versus merely feeling like we are making progress on a big problem. Now, in real life, if you're working on a big challenge like this, then what you should do is take time every week to update your metrics and identify these places where you're making progress, places where you're encountering blockers and you need to do something differently. So this is for those, some of you might realize this is a thinly disguised version of the Objectives and Key Results, or OKR framework. And if you recognize that, you probably recognize I'm doing some of this a little wrong, but I'm modifying this for the purposes of this talk today. There's a link actually in the resource page about, if you want to know more about the OKR framework, it's a highly useful sort of framework for tackling big problems. So let's look at 3 grand challenges for higher ed STEM education. Now, this area, higher ed STEM education, has a lot of possible grand challenges. I think we know this, probably at least as many as that list for the engineering disciplines that I showed you a second ago. But over the next half hour or so, I want to look at 3 that have particularly been top of mind for me, and perhaps they're on top of your minds as well. I know the first one is. The first grand challenge is to normalize alternative grading. Normalize alternative grading. Okay, so I thought I would start easy with you, relatively speaking, at least for this group. I mean, I don't need to tell you all anything about how important it is to reform our grading practices in higher education. And I'd like to once and for all just kill off this insidious influence of traditional points-based grading. You all probably know more than I do at this point, honestly, about alternative grading practices, because you've been living it, you've been building it out in your coursework. You're going to hear later on from some of your friends and colleagues about what's been going on. So instead of telling you a bunch of stuff you already know about the research and the importance of alternative grading practices, I just want to help you set your sights on some results that are pretty aspirational that would move the needle towards making alternative grading not alternative. The key, the goal here, I guess, is like, you don't call it alternative grading, you just call it grading. And the points-based system is what's going to eventually be weird and out of the norm. And by the way, as I'm going to show you some key results here on this, feel free to just delete any of these key results or modify them if they don't make any sense for you. As long as your key result is quantitated with a metric, that's all that really matters. So key result number 1, how do we work toward normalized alternative grading? So first of all, start with yourselves and take your work public. Okay. By the end of next academic year, each person here should publish 24 written articles of length at least 750 words. I told you this is quantitative, in some public space like a blog or Inside Higher Education or something like that, about how exactly you're implementing alternative grading and how it's going. So you're already doing alternative grading as part of this group, okay? The challenge you see here is saying, start with your own practice and share it amongst this group, but don't hide it. Instead, take it public. Tell people everybody, that is, what you're doing. Give all the boring details of the implementation in your syllabus. Write about your wild successes. Write especially about your wild failures. Don't hide it. Go public with it. Create that public pressure on others to follow in your footsteps. And then we'll begin to see, everyone will begin to see, that this whole alternative grading thing is not just a fad, it's really a revolution. So what's up with these metrics, you may be asking? Well, the number 24 I picked there because it's easy to measure and visualize. It amounts to 2 articles posted per month over a 12-month period starting, why not next week? That's the beginning of May, right? The 750 word count means that you can keep it short, but not too short. These are not intended to be tweets. In fact, please let me emphasize as much as I possibly can, don't use Twitter to publish your results, okay? Or don't only use Twitter to publish your results, all right? Among the many, many problems that Twitter has is that it's optimized for shallowness. Now, I know you see some of these 37 tweet long threads show up and man, they're so annoying. I can't stand those things. Every time I see them, I just think, just go get a blog. Just put it on a blog. It's free. So the problem with Twitter is it's optimized for shallowness. Not only do people not necessarily read all 37 tweets in that thread. If they do, they're just going to go cherry pick the one that they like the most and retweet it. So don't use Twitter for this alone. Get a blog, okay? On the resource page, I've given some links to some excellent free blog platforms that you can sign up for right now, even while this talk is going on. Highly recommend Substack, by the way. David Clark and I use that for gradingforgrowth.com, and it's a fabulous platform. And by tomorrow, you can probably have at least one of those 24 articles posted, okay? Don't overthink it. Just write up what you're doing, edit it lightly to make sure it's not like embarrassing typos or anything like that, and then just hit publish. Don't overthink it. Then you can take that link to the post and put that on Twitter if you want to. But the most important thing is go public with what you are doing. That's key result number 1. Key result number 2 is along the same lines as number 1. By the end of next academic year, set up a community of practice at your university that meets at least once a month to learn about alternative grading and support each other as you all do it. Here's the catch on this. Make this a long-term deal so that in 3 years' time, you're still meeting, okay? Because it's one thing to be a lone practitioner on your campus, even if you're part of a group like the TEA, which is fantastic, but you might be the only person on your campus or in your department doing this. It's one thing to do that by yourself, but it's another thing to be part of a group of colleagues at your campus. Spreading that love around to your colleagues and kind of creating a super spreader event, if I could use a virus analogy, maybe not appropriate, but there it is, and create a core group that's really committed to this idea of not just talking about alternative grading, but actually doing it in real life. The reason I bring this up is because Victoria Bofsar knows, because she and I have been working together for a long time. I've been out to Cal Poly 3 times, I think, to give talks. I go out and give talks and workshops several times a year to faculty at different campuses all over the place, all over the world. And everywhere I go, there are these lone practitioners that are really committed. They're passionate, and God bless them. But very rarely, in fact, Cal Poly is one of the rare exceptions. Very rarely do I find truly committed communities of practice that will carry on the discussion after I get back on the airplane. And this is where the attempt here is to create a community of practice. If you don't do that, you might as well not put me on the airplane in the first place. So the challenge here is to create that community of practice on your campus with your colleagues that will begin to just spread this idea around. And not just a 1-semester faculty learning community either. Those are great. I just led one myself at Grand Valley State, but an ongoing group, a real community that will stick together and evolve over time. Okay. You can work with your Center for Teaching and Learning if you have one on your campus, or you can do it yourself. But vibrant communities of practice on the local campus scale are really essential if we want real change. So that's key result 1.2. In 1 year's time, you can look back and say, I either did this or I didn't. Key result number 3. Okay, and this is probably the hardest of these key results for sure, because it's asking for systemic institutional change. Now, as part of the Teaching Experiment Academy, you're expected individually to redesign your classes so that at least 20% of the graded work in your class that you redesign is assessed using specs grading or mastery grading or some kind of alternative grading practice. The key result here is challenging you and your institutions to make this 20% mark happen amongst 1/4 of all the courses at your institution. So not just you and not just the person across the hall from you. You want to make it a very important part of a rising tide that will soon overtake your entire campus. 1/4 of courses at your institution are meeting the 20% mark that you individually have committed to as part of this group. Now, I get it. This is a weird metric because how would you even measure this, right? I mean, I confess I don't have a great answer for how you would measure whether or not you've hit a 25% mark across the entire institution. That isn't like super time consuming or expensive. But also notice that I've put a longer time scale on this to go all the way to 2025. So maybe that will give us enough time to figure out how to actually measure this. So this is more of an aspirational goal. And I think these 3 key results work well when you do them in order. Like, first of all, start publishing your stuff, make a habit out of it, okay? You might not think you have the time. I would definitely say that you probably do, and especially if you don't overthink it and keep it short. Publish your stuff, bring attention to what you're doing, then use that as a platform to build a local community, and then use that to push for the 25% mark, or maybe the 25% mark just sort of takes care of itself. One way or another, we normalize alternative grading. That's the grand challenge. The first one. Are you feeling overwhelmed yet? I hope you're not overwhelmed, because these are all things that can be broken down into small bits and done a little bit over time, and you'll be amazed. So now, when we do objectives and key results like this, what you commonly do is take stock of how confident you are that you can actually complete any of these things. So on this slide, if you look at your Mentimeter screen, it's asking for your confidence level right now on all 3 of these key results independently. So I'm wondering if you could just put that in real quickly and hit the submit button, and let's see where you're at here. It's okay if it's low, okay? I just want to say I have something to say about where should these levels be at the outset of a big project like this. But let's see what you have to say. If some of these confidence levels are like at a 9 or a 10 right now, we're probably not shooting high enough. Okay, we're probably sandbagging. We're intentionally setting easy goals so that we'll know we'll be able to meet them. I'm not saying that's a horrible thing. I do that definitely myself on a daily basis just to make myself feel better. But we're talking about systemic change and big problems. It's okay if some of these are on the low side. Yeah, so let that rack up. I think it's interesting that the start a community part is a higher confidence level than the publish twice a month part. Seriously, the thing about publishing blog posts, as I've been blogging for 15 years, is just don't overthink it. Just spit it out into Substack or whatever and click the submit button and just don't think about it. Okay, so we're racking it up here. I just wanted to say that the 2.3 stuff shouldn't deter you, okay? Most of the time when you're doing sort of OKR goal setting like this, the beginning level of confidence should be around 5, okay? Like there's a 50-50 shot this might happen, okay? And, it's okay to set high goals. I mean, we want to. These are big problems. We need to have high goals. So what I would encourage you to do is just each week, think about this. Where's your confidence level this time next Friday? Okay, has it gone up? Has it gone down? If it's gone down, you might want to take some time to drill into that. Like, what's the blocker? What is preventing me from posting a blog post? Or what's preventing me from talking to my department chair about wide implementation of alternative grading and so forth? So thanks for that. I'm going to keep asking some more questions here. I'm trying my best not to get too distracted by the chat, but there's some really good stuff going on in there. So what is the next challenge? Okay, the next grand challenge is related to the first one. It is to make active learning the default. Make active learning the default. Now, again, I probably don't need to tell anyone in this Zoom meeting about the importance of active learning and how beneficial it is for all of our students. But just in case you want to reference, there are several articles in the resource page. Perhaps the most important of these is the Freeman 2014 study that's in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, where Freeman and a team go into incredible detail in a meta-analysis of 225 other research articles about active learning, about how active learning improves the learning experiences and the life experiences of students involved in all kinds of different active learning situations compared to the same courses taught with traditional lecture. If you do nothing else today, once this seminar is over, sit down and read that 8-page paper and reflect on it, maybe by writing a blog post about it. See, I told you, this is actually, blogging is actually really easy if you don't pay too much attention to your writing quality. I guess that's my life motto there. When I was working on sabbatical at Steelcase Incorporated here in Grand Rapids back in 2017, I was asked a very good question I was the only educator on site there. These were all designers and corporate types. And they asked me, if active learning is such a great idea, and if active learning is so beneficial to your students, then why isn't anybody doing it? Why are so few people adopting it? So that's a great question. The key results that I'm going to attach to this grand challenge are my thoughts about how you might answer that question or attack it. First key result is kind of like the first key result for the first challenge, and that is start with yourself. Okay. There we go. And that is by the end of next academic year, make at least 75% of the instructional time in your own classes focused on active learning tasks. 75% of instructional time, 3/4 of the time in your class, you're doing active learning. Many of you may be doing this already. Some of you may think you're doing this already, but you actually might not be, because it's been shown through some research studies that I actually did not put on the resource page, that faculty, when asked, tend to greatly overestimate the amount of active learning that they use. So embedded within this key result is kind of another key result, and that is figure out a way to accurately measure the amount of active learning that takes place. Okay, and get that level to 75% of your entire instructional time. That would be 38 minutes out of a 50-minute class. Okay. Now, some people would object to this in two ways. Number one, we don't know what active learning is. There's no standard definition for it. So how are you going to know when it happens? And number two, we have no accurate way of measuring when and for how long it takes place. I want to assure you that both of those assertions are false. On the resource page, I have links to 2 different blog posts from my own website where I wrote about standardized definitions of active learning, one of which, due to Bonwell and Eisen, has been around for 20 years. And there's a brand new one, a really interesting framework called the Construction of Knowledge Framework that you can read about by Talbert, that you can also read about on the resource page. And there's also links to 2 separate instruments that you can use that are free to use, publicly available, to measure how much active learning is taking place in your classes if you don't trust yourself to measure it on your own. So this next academic year, take the time to, among other things, really get some clarity on how prevalent active learning is in your own classes and take measures to get it to be the default in your own teaching. So that's key result 2.1. Key result 2.2 is basically build stuff to help other people and other students get on board with active learning. So I was recently contacted by somebody asking me for videos that they could give to their students to help them learn about active learning, to explain to active learning on the students level and explain why it's so important. And to my great surprise and dismay, I didn't find anything. I think I got a few dribs and drabs later on, but there is just no repository out there with resources for students that you can just give a video to them or a pamphlet or whatever, and it will explain what active learning is and why we're doing it so much. There were lots of resources out there that were research reports, and there was a lot of stuff out there for instructors, but nothing for students. So it seems to me that a really good use of our time, as long as we're already creating materials on our blogs, wink, wink, about alternative grading, is let's create some good stuff for students and for our skeptical colleagues and for our administrators about what active learning is and how to get started with it. And that's the gist behind this key result that you see here. I put a metric on here for 10 print or video items. Okay, they don't have to be massive or lengthy. In fact, they probably shouldn't be, because otherwise they might not get seen. These can be anything. I'm thinking like videos, blog posts, slide decks, anything that another person who doesn't know about active learning and needs a boost from an experienced person like you could use. Now, there's a lot of research that's been done on barriers to adopting active learning and other research-based teaching practices, and they all kind of point in the same direction, that the biggest barrier to adoption of active learning is human in nature. People say they want research, but really what they want is a person. They want a person that's across the hall from them who can show them the ropes and help be available for questions and be available for commiseration when it fails on you, and just someone you can count on, that you can go to. And this key result is all about being that person, possibly to people who you've never met before and never will meet. And once you build these materials, again, go public with them, okay? Put them on a Google Drive folder and make the link public. Put them on Twitter if you must. Put them on YouTube. Put the videos on Vimeo. Don't hide them. Go public. And key result 2.3 is another institutional scale goal. You can see my philosophy here. Start with yourself, build it out to the local neighborhood, and then take it global across your entire campus. And this is probably the hardest key result in this entire talk here. By the end of the 2024-25 academic year, 25% of the departments on your campus should be using active learning as the primary focus of effective teaching, deep breath, in their standards for promotion, tenure, and merit raises. Now, this one's going to make a lot of people really angry, so let's talk about it. So another one of the major barriers to adopting any sort of innovative teaching methodology, you guessed it, it's the incentive system at our campuses. A lot of people choose not to use alternative grading or active learning or flipped instruction or whatever it is, because it's going to take time away from your research, or it will endanger your course evaluations or whatever. So the intent with this key result is to fix that. Okay, now how does this happen exactly? To address that question, I need to talk to like 3 different groups of people who may be in this audience. If you are listening or watching and you happen to be in a position of authority, you're a department chair, you're an associate dean, you're a vice provost, you're the president of your college, then guess what? You've got the power to fix this, so do it. Get out there and lead, okay? You have no need to ask for forgiveness if you go to a department and say, we have so much research that backs up the use of active learning. Where is it in your promotion tenure standards? Simple question. So start those conversations if you're in one of those positions. Insist on having them with faculty. And you could frame it like this, okay? This even goes for, even if you're not in a position of authority, frame it like this. We in this institution believe in science, and we're going to follow the science of our teaching. And that science tells us certain things in no uncertain terms about what needs to go on in class if we want to really serve our students. So I just want us to make our incentive system match what the science says. So does it or does it not? And if not, why not? Like I said, this is going to really make a lot of people angry, so just get ready for it, okay? So if you're in a position of authority that's not, it's still difficult, it's kind of sandpapery difficult, but it's not like you're going to lose your job difficult. What if you're just a rank and file faculty member though? Then you may not be able to be in a position of authority here, but you can agitate for it. You can be an activist for it. You can agitate with your friends who are in authority, with your department chair, provost, dean, president. If you have tenure as a faculty member, then really there's no excuse for you not to be doing this, okay? If you don't have tenure, or if you are in a position where you're never going to get tenure, like you're contingent faculty, you're not even tenure track, you still have a great, valuable voice, and you can still do a lot. I would suggest finding a fellow traveler who is tenured, okay? Maybe through your community of practice from challenge number 1, and get them to advocate on your behalf for this. Tenured faculty, especially full professors out there, that's what we have tenure for, is to be able to advocate for change like this on behalf of people who don't have the same kind of voice that we do. So let's not be afraid to do that. And for all of us here, no matter what or who we are, we can start changing the narrative. You know, many times when I talk about active learning or flipped learning or alternative grading systems, I get some pushback on this, and people say, well, you know, what research do you have that backs up the effectiveness of ungrading or whatever? And it's a fair question when it's asked in good faith, but oftentimes it isn't. Okay, when I will often answer them by giving them the research on active learning. Well, you know, Freeman wrote this paper in 2014 that says this, and then the person moves the goalposts. They don't necessarily actually want research, it turns out. What they're really after is a gotcha moment, and for me, to trip me up or trip you up, and no amount of science is going to ever help with those folks. So instead of answering that question, what research do you have that backs up active learning, I've started just flipping that question around and asking them, well, you know, what research is there that backs up lecture? I mean, or what research is there that backs up the effectiveness of traditional grading? So I've got the research, where's yours? So I think it's time to stop messing around with skeptics and just bring the fight to them. And don't be afraid to do that, especially if you're a tenured faculty member. Make active learning the default. And I think that those 3 key results are kind of a way to how we could do it. So what about these key results? I'm curious to know your confidence level starting here on April 29th. It might be low, and again, that's okay. I hope that it's non-zero at least. So what do you think? Where's your confidence level right now in each of these 3 key results about making active learning the default? The 2.1 shot out to a real big lead at first. Now people are kind of backing off of it. I don't know. Here it comes. Like I said, a lot of us are doing probably 75%. Make sure to actually measure that too, though. Right? I know if I did that, I looked at one of the instruments that I gave you in the resource page and kind of applied to my own class. I was like, oh, I'm not doing as much as I think that I'm doing. I actually measured that in my classes. Like, okay, I got a little work to do. Not surprisingly, the 2.31 is a little on the low side. That's a very difficult problem. And boy, when I mentioned that around my campus, I get the side eye like you wouldn't believe, because people don't want to enter into this discussion about, well, we shouldn't be telling people how to teach their classes on our university. But the problem is we already do that. Okay, like if one of my colleagues taught their class by physically abusing their students if they got math problems wrong, I mean, I would totally be telling them not to do that. Okay, so how much different? I mean, obviously, you know, physically abusing someone and using a lecture on them are like not in the same category of abuse. But I mean, if we know that we can help students and we just choose not to, is that okay? How is that okay? All right, so I'm pleased to see the confidence level there on the 75% active learning. Okay, that's good, because you got to start there. Building the onboarding materials. Again, I just want to mention that some of these key results work together, right? I mean, you can write material, or create a little video for your students and then stick it on your blog, right? And hey, let's 2 birds with 1 stone. Okay, very good, folks. The last one, last grand challenge I want to talk about is definitely related to the first 2, but it's also really different, because on this one, I'm actually not going to have quantitative key results on this, but I think it's a huge challenge that we need to talk about. And that is, we seriously need to fix our professional culture. Fix our professional culture. Now, if it sounds like this doesn't have a lot to do with STEM education, I would say it actually has everything to do with STEM education. So let me explain, quote unquote, by giving you 3 statements to think about. Rather than 3 key results, I'm going to ask you to rate your agreement or disagreement on these 3 statements. So where you work, meaning like your university, your department, however you may interpret that, how would you rate the following 3 statements? Okay. I'll let you read them, and you know how to use the sliders. And this is anonymous. No associate deans are going to be informed about what you say here. Although one of my guilty pleasures is the associate dean account on Twitter. I must say that's quality Twitter content. The first one's about feeling like you belong where you work, whether you feel safe to be yourself. Second one's about how comfortable are you being able to reach out to colleagues if you have help without fear or shame. And the last one's about purpose, shared purpose, and a compelling purpose. It's 2 things there. So I'm just let those roll in and see what you think. Okay, so yeah, so they're not at five, right? I mean, they're not at rock bottom. And I'm really happy and grateful to see that they're at rock bottom, because when they're rock bottom like this, that's a problem in many different ways. Um, I don't have any data on this. I'm not an anthropologist, but my experience has been that there is a strong correlation between a person's adoption of and enthusiasm level for research-based teaching practices on the one hand, and the level of agreement they have with these three statements on the other hand. Okay. And in other words, as this quote that I just totally made up says, high functioning academic environments are kind of all the same, but dysfunctional ones all have their own separate spin on dysfunction. And where there's dysfunction in a department, you will usually find faculty who do not embrace active learning or any other research-based teaching practices. In other words, culture has everything to do with teaching and learning. And I don't know if you see or read or hear about the same stuff that I do, but it appears to me that our professional culture needs serious, serious work. And, I just wrote this article recently, and it appeared in Inside Higher Education this week, about my experiments with ungrading this semester. And I was honest when I wrote it about my successes, and I wrote about my failures, just like I always do. And I wrote some questions I have and things that I might not have been doing particularly well. I just kind of laid it all out there. And I got a lot of responses to this article thanking me for being so brave to talk about my failures. And I thought that was really strange. I was really confused. I didn't think that was brave at all. I just thought it was reality. And I'm just a journalist of my own life, But it got me wondering, why is it considered brave to simply talk about what you're doing in a classroom at a public university? And I think the answer to that question, why is it considered brave, is culture. A culture means the ways that groups of people make sense and meaning together. You can think of it as like it's how we do things around here. That's what culture is. And there's three parts to organizational culture that make it or break it. And rather than give you three key results, because these are super hard to quantify, I just want to put these three aspects of culture in front of you and ask some questions about this. What's going well in this area where you work, and what needs work? The first of these is psychological safety. This refers to how safe it is in your workplace to take risks and make personal connections. It's strongly attached to whether you have a feeling of belonging in the place where you work. And it's going to be affected by many, many different variables. I just encourage you to reflect on these questions you see in front of you for a moment. In your academic workplace, do you feel safe taking risks, such as using alternative grading practices, or ramping up your active learning to 75% of your instructional time, or advocating for systemic change in your department's reward structure? Because your level of your answer to this will inevitably have some kind of connection to whether you and your colleagues are interested in spreading the kinds of teaching practices that we know help students. The second aspect of culture to think about is what we call vulnerability. This is similar to psychological safety, but whereas psychological safety is about how safe individuals feel to take risks, vulnerability is about how we signal our need for help to each other. So it's about groups of people. It's about how normal it is to share risks among your group. In a highly functional culture, like a great academic department, you have this virtuous cycle of signaling for help and then giving help, not in kind of like a mansplaining way of giving help, but because we realize, coming from this place of, I need help too, and we're gonna put our shared need for help out in front of each other and see what we can do with each other. Because we realize that we all need help in the organization. If you signal for help to me, I'm gonna bring my own need for help to you, and we're gonna work on it together without shame and without fear. By contrast, in a dysfunctional culture, and everybody's been part of one in their lives at some point, if you need help, you better keep it to yourself, because the consequences for signaling for it are just too much. So again, I would just ask you, I don't have a result for this or a metric. I would just ask you to reflect on these questions. To what extent is vulnerability normal in your academic workplace? Or would being vulnerable and signaling for help put you at a risk? And finally, a strong culture is about purpose. In a strong and functioning culture, you know what you stand for, you know what the group stands for, you know why you're there, and you know what you're working toward. Now, one of the reasons I organized this talk today the way that I did is to provide this organization and all of you with some challenges around which you can build this shared sense of purpose. Okay, I think the TEA has this already. You have this purpose. We're going to really do alternative grading and make this a normal event in our classes. So why not elsewhere? A strong and shared sense of purpose is not going to be a silver bullet. I mean, it's not going to give your 3-year-old kid a COVID vaccine. It's not going to line up good daycare. It's not going to make food prices go down or demilitarize Russia or anything like that. But it can provide your department and your workplace something to live for. And that will make it a much more exciting place to come to work. So does your department and institution know what it stands for? Is it clearly and simply articulated? And very importantly, is there strong evidence in the classroom that people are really serious about this? And it's not just copy on a mission statement. What I'm seeing right now is evidence that our academic cultures are so dysfunctional that even writing an innocuous blog post about my classroom activities is seen as an act of bravery, kind of on the level of being like a Ukrainian freedom fighter. It's totally not. But that dysfunction, I think, is the source of why it's the source of so much of our tiredness. And therefore, it's the true source of this funk that higher education finds itself in now. And I want to strongly emphasize here, and this might be the most challenging thing I give you in this talk, and it's saying something, that cultures don't fix themselves. There is no point waiting around as faculty for somebody, whether it's a university president or the president of the United States or a government funding agency or anything, to wait to have them swoop in and save us. It's our problem, and I don't think it's safe or wise to depend on others to fix it for us. It's something that we have to take on, fair or otherwise. And so that's the gist of my last question here. And this is just a text question. So this is a big challenge, fixing culture, right? So how do you begin? Well, it's just one thing at a time, right? So what is one thing that you think you can do in the next week to move the needle just ever so slightly to fix the culture that you live in, okay? Even if you identify that it's a really strong and vibrant culture, which I'm very happy for you. When you're in one of those, it's like the light bulbs are all on and it's all working great. But even then, there's always something that can be improved upon. So what do you think? What's something that you can do in the next week that you can do to help? So you can type these in and you can see them roll across the screen here in real time, reaching out to a colleague to check in. Very important. We all learned that during the pandemic. I was department chair during the pandemic, and there were a lot of challenges going on, moving 200 sections of math that was never designed to be online to online in 10 days time. It was a human problem, not a pedagogical problem. And speaking of which, all three of these now have the word colleague in them. I think that's definitely not a coincidence here. So what do you think? I mean, what's something you can do, simple, doable, inexpensive, and quick, but impactful, that can help improve the culture you're in right now? And we'll just give you a couple of more moments to think about it. I hope that you're inspired by what you're seeing, and I hope that simply by thinking about it, it creates sort of puts a stake in the ground in your own mind about, I should probably get this done. I'm scrolling down a little bit because there's all kinds of good ideas. These will still be up here at the link that I gave you for, I think it's a 5-day period before it wipes the answers out. Last day of class donuts. Wow, I want to come work where you are. That's a sign. I think bakery items are an excellent sign of a functioning culture. Yeah, I really like this one. Get that coffee with a colleague. I've been meaning to do all semester. Like, sometimes these are things that are already on your radar, but it's just like, I'm going to make this a priority this week and I'm going to get it done because there's no reason not to. Being thankful and grateful for, finding something thank a local leader for, and don't forget to actually thank the local leader to do that. I'm sure you had that on your mind as you wrote that. All right, well, you can continue to think about this, but since we're getting close to the end here, I wanted to draw this to a close by addressing a couple of things I didn't talk about here, especially one particular thing. I said earlier that there are way more than 3 choices for grand challenges in higher ed STEM teaching. Believe me, there are probably 30 if there's 3. The 3 that I've given here are just the top of mind for me. So don't take the omission of any other things from this list as a sign of being lower importance. This means I probably didn't think about it. I want to especially address one very grand challenge to all of us, and that is ongoing issues of systemic racism and the exclusion of various groups of people in STEM, especially in STEM, unfortunately, that after all this time and all this effort we put into trying to alleviate this problem, it's still with us. I considered making diversity, equity, and inclusion one of the grand challenges today, but in fact, I think that it's so grand that it transcends the very concept of a grand challenge. I actually think of diversity, equity, and inclusion as sort of a mega or meta challenge. It's so big that the only way to get any real results on it is to break it down into grand challenges with their own sets of key results, like you see in the little diagram here. So I will say that the way that you don't address issues of racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and all the rest, the way you don't address this is to create yet another vice presidency position and yet another institutional office. This is merely abstracting the problem away from real people, us, and it makes it somebody else's problem. Sometimes you do need administrative oversight on these things, but let's not pretend it's somebody else's problem. It's my problem, and it's something that I need to work on. And I think there's more than enough research out there to show us that each of these grand challenges I presented today are themselves doorways into making real progress on this mega challenge. I put some links to some of that research on the resources page. For example, certain forms of active learning have been shown to statistically erase achievement gaps in women in the STEM disciplines and among other minoritized groups. So I would really encourage you, if your university has a DEI office, and I assure you it does, ask them a couple of things. Does your plan for making progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion include support for ramping up active learning? If not, why not? Ask them, would you in the DEI office lend your support to an initiative that would, by the end of the 2024-2025 academic year, have 25% of all the departments on this campus using active learning as the primary focus of effective teaching in their standards for promotion, tenure, and merit raises? Would you support that? If not, why not? There are some pointed questions that need to be asked so that that inclusion does not become somebody else's problem. So these are all big, big challenges, right? And it's going to need a certain mindset from all of us to make progress. It's not hard, though. All it takes is positive energy, focused discipline, and principled risk-taking, okay? All of us can do this. Positive energy, let me just say one last thing. This excludes most of what you see from academics on Twitter. Okay. Right now, a lot of people are kind of up in the air about staying on Twitter because of Elon Musk. I would highly just recommend just saying, like, this is an excellent opportunity to walk away from social media altogether. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to think about doing that. Focused discipline, also a good reason to walk away from social media, and working on your own habits and productivity so that you have the time and the energy to do this. And I would just encourage you to see my writing about productivity for more on this. And for principled risk-taking, even if it might get you into trouble, it's good trouble, as they say. Do your homework, take the risks you think you need to take for students' best interests. And let's face it, all this stuff, alternative grading, active learning, flipped learning, it's not safe. It's not safe choices for you, okay? That worst case scenario where nobody does the pre-class work and flipped learning, it's gonna happen if you do it often enough. But that shouldn't deter you. I mean, ask for forgiveness, not permission on this. At some level, if you're going to change things in higher ed, you have to not only be okay with risk-taking, you actually sort of have to enjoy risk-taking. And I will just leave you with that thought here. I hope this talk has been helpful in some kind of a way and challenging in some ways, and perhaps both. I want to wish you all the best as you move forward. And please, if you have any questions or want to reach out, my contact information is on the resource page, and I would absolutely love to hear from you.